couple of I guess, discussion steps or some questions that we want to get a little bit of feedback from you as we continue our work to ensure that we're also obviously advocating for the needs and the interests of the district around Senate Bill 16. So let me just start quickly with an introduction. My name's Jeff Schuler, I'm the new superintendent for District 200. With me this evening, and he's going to be helping in the presentation, is Bill Farley. Bill Farley is our assistant superintendent for business operations. He's going to be helping us out with a couple of the key finance-related slides. And again, I do want to just make one comment at the onset tonight, and that's we're here to talk about funding in Illinois and a bill that's seeking to shift the way that funding is allocated in Illinois. And just one disclaimer up front, school funding in Illinois is not a very easy, clear, transparent topic to explain. The part of the drive behind Senate Bill 16 was I think, what was supposed to be an effort to bring a little bit of clarity to that transparency. But again, I just want to mention that what we're going to try to do is really simplify and hit the high points around Senate Bill 16 without diving too deep into the finance pieces. Certainly, as we finish tonight, if you do have any additional questions and need for follow-up information, I want to assure you that we are available for follow-up to try to help provide whatever additional information that we can. So we will certainly do that. Okay. With that, I think I'm going to first turn it over to Mr. Farley. Sure, I can do that. Let me actually make a couple of other introductions really quickly before I bring Mr. Farley up to dig into the funding piece. I want to introduce some of the members of the senior leadership team that are here this evening, as well as a couple of members of the Board of Education that are with us tonight. So in the back, we have Faith Dahlquist, our Assistant Superintendent for Educational Services, Erica Leacano, who's our Director of Community Relations, Mr. John Pilkington is the principal here at Hubble, Adam Ferguson is the Assistant Principal at Hubble, Mr. Rod Mack is our Executive Director of Technology, Joanne Panopoulos is our Assistant Superintendent for Special Services. Bob Rammer is our Assistant Superintendent for Administrative Services. Mrs. Barb Intihar is our President of the Board of Education. Rosemary Swanson, member of the Board of Education. I believe Jim Broman, member of the Board of Education as well. So thank you for being here this evening. And again, certainly as we get into the question and answer, I do want to make you aware of for those folks because they will be around to help answer questions if you have as well. So with that said, I am going to turn it over to Mr. Farley to get us started in the finance discussion.
Good evening and welcome to Hubble Middle School. Thank you for attending tonight. I'm going to do a little of the discussion that focuses mainly on how we're funding currently, what the situation of funding is in the state of Illinois, and then we'll talk more about Senate Bill 16. A couple of charts for review to look at. Information as far as how we're currently funding now. We're looking at the national average, we're looking at the state average, and then we're going to drill down into District 200 and where our funding is. If you look at the slide on the left-hand side, you'll see on the national average, state and local funding is generally pretty split, with federal funding being the remainder. Those are the three main sources of how school districts are funded throughout the country. And as you'll see, it's pretty equal as you look at it on a national basis. When you turn down into the state of Illinois, you'll start to see that at the local level, that percentage starts to go up quite a bit. It's up to almost 60%, with 28% being state level and then 12% federal funding. This next chart has a little bit more detail, but tells the message of what's going on here in District 200 and where the district receives their funding. As you know, 79% of the funding comes from property taxes. But also, if you look at that red piece, the other locals, another 5%. So almost 84% of our funding comes from the local level. Those other local include fees that the district collects and interest earnings and other local collections that the district does. So as you see, from the national to the state to the local or the school district 200, that percentage goes up quite a bit, and the onus is really at the local level, with the state funding going down quite precipitously as well. As far as our school district goes, and the amount of money that we spend per student, we're very close to the state average of $12,045. These numbers, if you came to the prior presentation, have recently changed. The state updated their numbers as of October 31st. And you can see that the amount that our district spends per student is very comparable to the overall state average. Obviously, we deliver a high-quality education for our students based on that spending. This is the 5th year that our Board of Education has passed a balanced budget. Obviously, the district was not immune when the economy turned bad back in 2008. The board took corrective measures to get the budget balance, and this is our 5th year in a row. During that time, state funding dropped by over $6 million to the school district. I'm going to talk a little bit about our school district funding and our benchmarks. Benchmarks for school districts are both Naperville, 204 and 203. Elmhurst, St. Charles, and Barrington are the school districts that we use as benchmark or comparison districts for not only funding but also for test scores and other educational markers. Our school district has the second lowest property taxes collected per student. There's a chart below. It did not include Elmhurst, the other benchmark, but the source was the Daily Herald. You can look at that and see how much we collect per student. There's our benchmarks were the second lowest collection per student. We have the second lowest tax rate amongst all of our benchmarks. We have the second lowest property value behind each student as well. And that's really a function of the amount of property that's off the tax rolls in the school district. Obviously, we have a lot of forest reserve, churches, schools, parks, college, a number of non-taxing bodies in town, and not a lot of industry or commercial compared to some other school districts. We're below average of our benchmarks in our operating costs per student, and we have the second most efficient student to administrator ratio of 283 to 1. So the district runs very efficiently with the money we receive, and again, that money is scheduled to go down with Senate Bill 16. We'll talk about that as well.
So, a little bit about then what Senate Bill 16 is. Senate Bill 16 really has its origin starting around July of 2013. And at the time, there was a Senate Advisory Committee that really came together and was tasked with really looking at the school funding formula. The original concern that brought about this Senate Funding Advisory Committee was some information that started to come out that really talked about the way that money was being distributed in the state to schools. And so just a little bit of the original history behind the funding formula. The concept is that the funding formula in Illinois looks at the local school district's available local wealth, compares it to what the state says education should be funded at. And so, in theory, the districts that need more money from the state because they have less local available resources get more money from the state. But what started to happen in July of 2013 that kind of brought about this discussion is that in looking at the funding formula, it became apparent that over time, as that formula was put into place, less and less money was going through that means testing idea. So as sort of different changes came in over time, there was a lot of money within the state that was flowing out through existing kind of locked-in grants. It wasn't necessarily being tested so that so it was kind of going through that means idea. So the Senate Advisory Committee did come together, really studied this idea, and so their idea was to create a single funding formula in Illinois. And so what I mean by a single funding formula is right now we get money that comes in a couple of different silos. We get what's called general state aid. That comes in and has, in general, the most flexibility in terms of how it's used. Within a district, we get money that comes in what are called mandated categorical grants. So money that comes in that has to be used to fund transportation, money that comes in that has to be used to fund special education programs. Those are called mandated categorical grants. So there were all these kind of little silos. And so the idea in Senate Bill 16 was, let's try to bring that into one formula that again has more of a connection to that means test, right? The districts that we need to get. What I do want to point out very clearly is that Senate Bill 16 does not in any way increase the level of funding for education in Illinois. It simply redistributes the existing money that's in the system, and in a couple of minutes, I'm just going to show you a couple of numbers that actually show what the current state of funding is in Illinois. And again, I guess important to note, it really is already an underfunded system. So even what the state says should be going to education isn't. So it's kind of taking what's a current underfunded system and simply redistributing it in a different way. The Illinois State Board of Education has a couple of funding principles that they use. And so, again, I just want to share this at the onset before we get into talking about what Senate Bill 16 does to our school district, because it is important to know this is what the State Board of Education says should guide any funding formula in Illinois. One, it should be adequate. There should be enough money in the system to fund education at the level the state says it should be funded. So again, in theory, that funding formula is intended to try to help equalize and make sure every student in Illinois that has a right to an education does at least get an appropriate education. Again, still understanding there are going to be districts that can fund above that level, but nobody should have to fund below that level. So it should be adequate to that level. Two, it says it should be simple. So people should understand how money flows out. I'm just going to dispel any myths you may have. We're failing in that regard. It is not a simple formula, even though there was an attempt to simplify it. It's still very, very difficult to understand. Three, it should be transparent. People should be able to understand it, see exactly how dollars are flowing. And again, concept behind that is when money was not going through that means testing piece, it didn't look very transparent, right? There were districts getting lots of money that probably shouldn't have been getting it because it wasn't really transparent how that money was flowing. Four, equity. Very clearly, Senate Bill 16 attempts to address equity, making sure the districts that need it get it in terms of resources. And then finally, five, the concept is that it should be outcome focused, right? So if you're getting money from the state of Illinois, it should be tied to a district's ability to deliver certain outcomes in terms of the education that they're providing. So there's got to be some connection to what it is that you're doing. And again, if I go back to the slide that Mr. Farley shared a couple of minutes ago, if you look at a district like 200, the achievement of our students far exceeds state averages. If you look at our spending, much closer to the state average. So in theory, if you're using outcome-based funding, a district like ours should not get penalized under a system like that. So, a little bit then about how District 200 does actually get impacted through Senate Bill 16. Under the way that the formula would be redeveloped, redistributed, we would lose about $9.8 million in state funding. Our total allocation of dollars that comes from the state of Illinois currently about $17 million. And so again, as I mentioned before, there are certain pots of money. For us, it's about $12 million of our overall state funding that's being kind of reconsidered under this new formula. And again, we're losing about $9.8 million of that $12 million that's being reconsidered. Just to give you a sense, and I'm going to drop down and then come back up, in the state of Illinois, that's the 5th biggest reduction that any school district sees. In our county, it's the 2nd largest reduction, second only behind District 204, a neighbor of ours that loses slightly more. There is a provision in the Senate Bill 16 language that those reductions would be phased in over a series of years, but again, important to know, this would be a permanent redistribution of resources. So this isn't like a temporary, let's fix it for a year and then try to phase it back. That loss in state revenue would carry forward once phased in. And we do get asked this question, and again, we may come up a little bit in the question and answer, just to give you some concept of what that almost $10 million means. It's about the equivalent of 132 teachers across the district. Now, if faced with the actual reality of making those budget cuts, would that necessarily come straight out of all cuts to teachers? Maybe not, but that just gives you a sense of what that represents in terms of not only a loss in dollars, but a loss in education to the students within our school district. So a couple of concerns that we have beyond simply the $9.8 million. That's a number that in and of itself communicates, I think, a very large concern in terms of what it represents. But we do have some other concerns with it, and I do think that the one thing that's become, I think, a big point of discussion, I mentioned a few minutes ago that discussion around adequacy. Because Senate Bill 16 doesn't do anything to address adequacy of funding, it's just a redistribution of existing funds. It does very clearly in that redistribution create winners and losers, and candidly across the state, it's about half and half. About half the districts, they're going to receive additional funds through it, half the districts that are not. And so there is a concern not only within our district, but I think within a lot of the educational circles that simply redistributing existing funds without anything that talks about adequacy, looks at outcome focus, it really does just create winners and losers within the state, which I don't think is a good thing. Two, our slide a few minutes ago, where again Mr. Farley talked about our level of spending relative to the state average. So again, in theory, the formula should look at your local available wealth compared to what it is that you need to spend. A district that's spending right about at the state average should not be losing $9.8 million. There's something in that formula that truly is not calculating correctly that concept of local wealth. And I do, so there's a couple of things tied into that I want to kind of help you understand that can factor into that. One is that the formula has some provisions that don't account for what are called TIF districts. TIF districts are property that basically are protected through tax increment financing, and so there's kind of an artificially deflated value of that property in the way that it's calculated into the formula. The more TIF you have, right, the more that your local available wealth is actually artificially low. Huge issue in the city. Very candidly, that's the place where, under this formula, that comes to play most, is in the city of Chicago. Four, and one of the things that I think we've referenced, is there isn't anything in the bill, so obviously bottom line is we don't want to lose the money. It'd be very difficult to absorb that type of loss and sustain our level of programming. But certainly if for some reason we are, if the state's going to reduce that level of funding, it should do something to also ease up some of the mandates in terms of the types of services that we have to provide. So as I talk about funding that comes in around special education programs, vital and important to the success of our students. But the reality is we have to deliver those services. It's the right thing to do. So I'm not communicating that we wouldn't want to do it, but the bottom line is not only is it the right thing to do, we have to do it. We're required to provide language services to students that need language services. We're required to provide driver's education within the state. We're required to provide daily physical education within the state. And so there are mandates. We've talked just recently about some of the new testing requirements that are coming out. The new testing requirements are requiring additional technology and infrastructure to be able to deliver them. And so one of the things that we've communicated is that if you are going to, in fact, reduce our funding, you're going to reduce a $12 million pot of money by almost $10 million, there should be something that comes with it that at least gives us some relief of the mandates that basically say you've got to do this, but you still have to provide the same level of service. That's tough to do within it. So again, in sort of my order of priority, I don't want to lose the money. But understand that this last concern is, if it is eventually going to happen, we're going to lose something, we need some level of relief in how we go about it. I had mentioned this a few minutes ago, and again, I just want to show it to you to kind of get at an understanding of the adequacy argument that's in there. So the state has created what's called a foundation level. A foundation level is different from your overall operating expense, but at the core of funding, they've created what they call a foundation level, which says that there needs to be at least $6,119 in the foundation level behind every student in the state of Illinois. That's been the foundation level for a long time. It used to increase every year. The foundation level would go up. It hasn't gone up in a very long time, since funding became an issue. There was recently, though, an advisory group that came together called the Education Funding Advisory Board that really looked at, we know the foundation level hasn't gone anywhere in a while, but where does it really actually need to be to provide an adequate level of education for students in the state of Illinois? And the number that they've come up with that again, really has been through the ringer in terms of verifying that it's a good quality number is actually 8,672. So as it is, our current level of funding in education is about $2,500 below where it even should be. Under Senate Bill 16, with that redistribution, that foundation level actually comes all the way down to 5154. So it takes a system already underfunded and actually drops it down yet one more notch in terms of where it is. So the big question, the million-dollar question is, there's this issue floating out there, what's next? What can we do in terms of any efforts to work around this? So we have been communicating and sharing information about Senate Bill 16 actually for a very long time. I think I started in the district on September the 2nd, and I'm pretty sure I started having conversations about SB16 here somewhere around September 3rd, after we came in and started. So actually going back a little over a month, we actually had a breakfast with a group of legislators in the area, one of them being the current sponsor of Senate Bill 16 within the House. And at that time, a little over a month ago, the level of response from all of the elected officials there were everything from, you need to be very concerned, this is real, this has potential to pass, to the sponsor herself who said, I'm never going to call this one, it's not going to go anywhere. Forget about it, don't worry about it. Well, I want to tell you that actually as early as next week now on Tuesday, just came out I think yesterday, there is a hearing that's been called on Senate Bill 16. Several of the House committees, the Elementary Secondary Education, the Appropriations Committee are all coming together and holding a joint hearing on Senate Bill 16. So just in the way of kind of a quick recap to that legislative process, a bill first goes into committee, gets passed out of committee. As soon as it's passed out of committee, then it's out, it's on the floor, it can be voted on. And so, again, this bill's got some level of legs and momentum. Whether it will actually make it out of the House in this current legislative session or not, I do want to tell you that something like Senate Bill 16 or close to Senate Bill 16, it is going to continue to be an active part of the conversation. And so the first very immediate thing that I will tell you that you can do is that you can actively take a role in that committee hearing that's scheduled for next week. In your blue folder, There's a sheet of paper. That says, Senate Bill 16, let your voice be heard in Springfield. And it has step-by-step instructions on how you can go about signing up online to submit testimony for that hearing. It doesn't mean you have to actually say anything. You can simply go online and just indicate that you oppose Senate Bill 16, or conversely, if you didn't, you can go on and indicate that you do support the bill. I would encourage you, though, to at least let your voice, let your name be heard within the committee. As things are being reviewed in committee, it does make a difference when they hear from folks beyond just the typical lobby groups that will be a part of the process here. So certainly the last time we did this presentation, we didn't have this information to share, but a new thing that we can share very, very recently that you can do to get involved. Second thing, and I think again, really the primary purpose of this session tonight is we just want to make sure that we are creating awareness around this. If in fact some changes occur as a result of Senate Bill 16 or something like it, we don't want at that point for community members to say, wow, I had no idea that $10 million in funding was at risk. So the reality is if we lose funding at that level, we're going to be faced very quickly with a decision that either looks like, let's make cuts somewhere in that level, or let's talk about how it is that we can go about replacing that revenue. And again, in a district like 200 that is funded primarily out of local property dollars, there aren't a lot of options. You either make those cuts, or the folks that are paying taxes help to make up that loss. So again, if something like that happens, that's the conversation that would need to be created, and hopefully at that point, it's not with folks that weren't aware of the fact that this was possible. Three, certainly we hope that you'll advocate for the district. It's critically important that we make sure that a district like 200, that we do advocate for the interests of 200. And again, I will come back very simply to the statement I made, which is this kind of loss doesn't make sense, candidly, for our districts. There are districts that spend well beyond the state average. And so perhaps a reduction in state funding makes some level of sense if you are spending thousands of dollars beyond the state average. We're not. We are, by state comparisons, we are a district that does well. We produce in terms of results for our kids, but we're not property rich compared to some of the districts. And so we would hope that you'd advocate for our district. And then certainly, as you contact, if you do get involved in contacting area legislators or those that are involved, we'd urge you to encourage them to create a realistic plan. So I started this by saying, yes, there is an issue with funding in Illinois. We've got to find some level of solution that actually gets us back to those core principles by the Illinois State Board of Education, but it's got to be a plan that's deeper than what's currently out on the table. So I mentioned the witness slip that you can fill out. I will also certainly mention that in advocating for it, you are welcome to call any of our area legislators. I think, Erica, that information is in the packet as well. It's also available on our website, so there's a link on our website where any of the resources we've made available around Senate Bill 16 are up and available again, including a listing of representatives that you can contact. We'd urge you, obviously, to talk to your friends, neighbors, those that are not here tonight that may not have any awareness or understanding that this is going on. Please clue them in to it. Please encourage them to get involved. And then a lot of the information around, outside of meetings like this, around some of the other print communications that have come out from the district, we've continued to share information through our social media outlets as well. If you go onto our website, you can like us on Facebook, or you can follow us through Twitter, and you'll see information that we put out as quickly as we get it, and it's available. website. So I think this is a good point for me to take a little bit of a break before we kind of get some feedback from you, and I'm going to entertain any questions that you might have about any of the information that we've presented tonight.
So the formula is based on property taxes or property values? What is it based on?
The formula would be based on property value, not property taxes. So property taxes, obviously that can vary significantly based on tax rates and some of the other variables. This really looks at what is the value of property within your district relative to the amount of money that you're getting from the state. So it's value, not taxes.
Just a general observation that a lot of the information about this has come through me because I have a child in school. But this impacts our entire community. So what kind of information is out there for people who don't have kids in school who could be really affected by this? Word of mouth? Do I not have any in the store? FYI?
Yeah.
Like news articles?
Yeah, good question. We've written actually a couple of articles so I have a monthly column through the Daily Herald, and this was the focus in one of those columns. It was part 2 of a focus in the most recent column. So we have tried to put some information out through some of our print media. I will say that most of our local elected officials are pushing information out about this as well. So again, the good news is we're not in an area where our local elected officials are supporting Senate Bill 16. Candidly, they're not. They've opposed it, and again, we hosted a little bit earlier in the year. We hosted a forum at Warrenville South High School. It was Senator Conley and Representative Jeannie Ives that worked together to do it. So they've tried to put some information out. I think you're kind of getting to one of the questions. We are going to ask you for some feedback. We are open to other ideas. So as we ask for a little feedback in a couple of minutes, if you've got another great idea for us in terms of how we can get this out to maybe residents that don't have students in our schools yet, need to be an active part, we absolutely are open to it.
I don't know how many districts we have in Illinois. The majority of school districts benefit from this bill, more than this one.
Yep. So the question is, how many school districts we have in Illinois, and do the majority win or lose? So there are about, I think by the last count, there are about 870 school districts in the state of Illinois. And this is kind of just an interesting tidbit, because maybe something else that you might want to consider pursuing in conversation if you're talking to any of the elected officials. So District 200 belongs to an organization called the Large Unit School District. So in Illinois, there are basically 3 types of school districts. K-12 districts, they're called unit districts. Elementary districts that cover grades K-8, and then high school districts that only educate students in grades 9 through 12. The large unit school district is actually a collection of about 37 school districts, 37 out of the 870 that I mentioned, that collectively educate, I think by last count, it's like 55 to 60% of the student population. And so one of the issues, candidly, in Illinois is we have too many school districts. We really do. And so the simple answer to it is we've got about 870, and that's too many. About half and half in terms of winners and losers, realistically. So in DuPage County, there's only one school district in DuPage County that actually gets some money out of this, and that's the West Chicago Elementary School District. But interestingly, so kind of back to that issue of how is the local property wealth being calculated, West Chicago High School District, same community, loses money. Elementary district gains money. I go.
So from the breakfast you reference, do you think that this bill will be pushed through before the new governor comes in? And given the new governor and sort of his bent, I find it hard to believe he would veto SB16.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, or I think an observation. I don't know the likelihood, honestly, of this getting out right now. I would, if based on where the sponsorship of this bill is coming from, I would suspect you won't see something come out until there's a new governor that's been seated, would be my guess. You're right, I wouldn't assume that he would very likely support it, but I will tell you very honestly, at the time of the last forum that we had before the election was done, neither of the candidates had taken any kind of position on this. I think during the campaign they kind of stayed away from it. I would suspect at some point in the very near future, as the conversation heats up, we will probably hear something from the governor in terms of what his position might be on it.
My question is, say it is passed, what happens next? I understand the money is gradually, and I understand that we don't ever generally have all the money we're supposed to have anyway. So what's going to happen? We're going to drop sports, we're going to drop the arts, we're going to, a little bit of everything. I mean, and how is this going to affect our neighborhoods? I live in the north side of the river, and on the other side of County Farm Road is the other school district, west of County Farm Road. So same house would go for $20,000 to $30,000 less than houses in District 200. How that's got to affect that? Is that an unspoken?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great observation, and so let me kind of break that question down into two parts. The first just being, what would that look like if something like this were to happen? So I want to be clear that right now our efforts have continued to be in advocating for our interests around Senate Bill 16 and pushing back in any way that we can on it. We're at the same time not kind of, sitting head covered under the sheets, not planning for the fact that this could happen. And so what does that look like? That looks like really us beginning to look at where potentially could you make some reductions if you had to make reductions of the magnitude of $2.5 million that sort of cumulatively goes up. It would be very difficult to think you could absorb that kind of a budget cut without very likely hitting a number of different areas. So again, I'll just give you by way of an example, and I want to be really clear, I'm just illustrating the point. I'm not suggesting something that's an option. But in looking at some of the options, we already began to look at, could you even absorb cuts of this magnitude simply by raising class sizes to the highest threshold possible, literally classes of 35 kids. We couldn't get there through doing that. So even if we raised every class across the district to 35 kids, we couldn't hit that number. Right? I mean, that's sort of the level that you're talking about. And so yes, it would likely need to come from areas that sort of impact a whole lot of things. I think a couple of weeks ago, the Board of Education, they have a great opportunity each year to have a chat with students at each of the high schools. And we were at Wheaton North, and I'll tell you from the student perspective, there were a lot of things that the students covered, but a prevailing theme from the students is an integral part of our high school experience is the access that we have to clubs, to sports, to opportunities to really build a peer group, and the students were amazingly grateful for the opportunities that the district, but it would be tough to think that you wouldn't have to lose some of those opportunities.
My oldest son is on a full ride athletics, football scholarship. And I mean, the opportunities, I have 3 children in college so far, and it is outstanding the preparation that they receive for college. And so it's kind of a hard thing to swallow.
But I think, I guess I do want to say, so the making budget reductions is something that the board has had to work through, unfortunately, over the last couple of years. And so I want to assure you that if in fact something like this happened, that there would be a very thoughtful process and approach to really looking at how it is that you could deal with the challenge, right? That, again, school district, 75% more of our budget is tied up in people business. So you can't make substantial reductions without taking away people. And when you take away people, at some point you're going to be taking away opportunities for kids. It's just a reality, unfortunately.
Dr. Schuler, these 37 large unit school districts, do they have representation in Springfield according to the 55 to 60% of students that they educate, or is it 37 out of 87?
We do have representation, so that's part of the reason why that organization exists, is that we certainly believe that districts that are the size of the unit districts have needs that are unique to some of these smaller districts. And so that's really the purpose of the organization, is that we do have somebody that does work and lobby on our behalf through LUDA. Here's one of your issues, candidly, through LUDA. Even the LUDA districts, there are winners and losers. And so a lot of the professional organizations that would normally be lobbying for or against legislation aren't really taking a position on this because, so the Illinois Association of School Boards, the Illinois Association of School Administrators, they all represent school districts. About half their members win, half their members lose. They're not going to take a position. They're really not, unfortunately. So candidly on this one, a lot of the lobbying effort is coming directly from school districts, from folks like myself, and in our position, taking as active a role as we can and lobbying for. What I will tell you that a lot of them are doing, though, is even an organization like LUDA has some core concerns with the way that this formula was constructed. And so they are taking an active role in not necessarily saying, like, hey, I'm for or against Senate Bill 16, but we have a real concern with many of the issues that we identified up there, and we're going to tell you, if you're going to solve this problem, take the time and solve it, and do it right.
Especially given the number that we're at the state average. In our spending already, we're not excessively spending. Yeah.
State.
And SB16 has about 5,000
State.
Okay. So they're actually lowering the foundation and already getting funding to deal with the state or 50 education.
Right.
So what is it that other states do that Illinois does that makes it 50
Yeah.
education?
Yeah. That's a great question. So the major issue to that is the level of revenue that's going into it. So the question was, what is it that other states are doing that Illinois is not, that puts us in a position? And really the simple answer to it is they put more money into education, right? By law, by Constitution, states provide a free and appropriate public education, and that requires the resources going into the system, candidly, to make that happen. I think, Bill, you want to share with the other state that kind of went through something similar to Illinois, what their solution was.
This bill is actually modeled somewhat after the Massachusetts model that was put into place a few years ago. The one difference between something what's happening in Illinois and what happened in Massachusetts was Massachusetts infused about $1 billion of funding at the same time they were making this change. Again, that addresses the equity issue and the adequacy issue. And again, I think Illinois was given a grade of an F on equity, so nobody's arguing the equity issue with state funding, but the adequacy issue is obviously a big piece. So Massachusetts found a way to make it work. Our state is not.
I'm wondering if, are you considering raising property taxes to make up for this, and how much would that be?
Yeah.
My husband kind of did a little, it has to be, just saying, per resident, and it would be less than $100 per year. Is that accurate, or would it be more? I know it's not fixing,
Yeah.
obviously, the state's not.
Yeah, so, the second part of that question would be a little tough to answer right now, meaning what would be the impact if, you attempted to cover the shortfall through, an increase in taxes. But I guess I want to come back to answering the first one. Right now, no, I want to say very clearly, the board is not actively, seeking any kind of an operating rate increase, but would it be real clear that what I think the discussion process would have to look like, if in fact this were enacted, is that I think we have to be able to be real clear and transparent to the community. These are the cuts. This is what we would have to lose. Then I think that's got to be a community conversation saying, are you okay with that? Or do you want to put in place a revenue solution? And really the only revenue solution would be raising the local tax rate. I mean, that's candidly, know that I answer that question not saying the board has any desire to do that, but that's the simple, hard reality, which kind of comes back to that original, piece about if this were to happen, we want the awareness raised out there so that at some point, like it or not, we can get to that question. And that would have, I realize that would be a very difficult question, but that's what we have to get to it, and we have to get there relatively quickly in terms of that discussion.
Just to try to answer that, if the number here is 138 million in property taxes and you're going up by 10, you're going from 138 to 140 or 150, right? So it's a 5% increase.
5%.
Not a big number, really.
That's too easy. That's not too. It's in.
No, it's just a nice way to answer the shortfall. That's
Yeah, talk just
the
the
shortfall.
just the shortfall.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're just, since you want us to contact Springfield, I know we're being reactive, but we gotta get behind this. The concerns that you've outlined, would you want us to take those and apply them to our?
You certainly can. So if you,
Would
yeah.
you want us to?
Yeah, I mean, you are welcome to use any of the talking points that are up there. There's also a set of talking points, again, I think separate from the PowerPoint in your packet. You're welcome to use that. There's some information on our website. Welcome to use any of that. If you go on and you do submit what's called a witness slip to the hearing, you have two options when you submit the witness slip. Actually, you have three options. You go in there. The first is just to say, you can submit what's your view on the bill being considered. Do you support it or do you oppose it? And then there will be an option where you could, if you were going to be in Springfield, say, I'd like to make oral testimony at the hearing, or you can submit, there's a box that says I'd like to submit written testimony. And then it gives you very clear directions on what you have to do to submit that. You can grab it out on a piece of paper, and then it has to be either fax or mail. They don't accept it online.
So will District 200, besides the online test, or will District 200 have representation at that hearing?
And great question. We certainly will be represented at the hearing and looking at exactly how that representation is going to look. But yes, we will.
I actually sit on that committee.
Ginny.
Yeah.
I didn't notice. Good to see you as well.
I'm actually the state rep in this area, and I actually sit on that Education Appropriations Committee that we're having a joint hearing with the Education Policy Committee. So I said it in Naperville yesterday. I tell you what, I read your emails, and I frequently use the emails. You say, well, you know what? This is what our constituents are telling me. And I'll read right from a very pointed email so that they hear your voice down there. So if you sometimes say it much better than I do, or pick up on other points. So if you email us, that would be great with your comments. Or if you have questions, I make sure that those all get answered too. But I am thankfully I've got it on that committee. You never know what's going to be handed to you, and I'm so glad I'm on this committee at this time in history.
Just a quick introduction. This is Representative G. Roberts, who's the representative that represents our constituents. So, other questions, like group questions?
If this passes, when does it, when would it be enacted?
Implementation date. I haven't seen an implementation date on it. That probably depends on, if it were to happen, it would probably depend on what session it would be passed in. So there is a reality which, sort of one other, back to the mandate discussion we had a few minutes ago. So there's a statutory requirement around which if we were to release any staff members, any certified staff members, we have to do it by a certain required date. That date typically falls in the middle of March, roughly. It's a certain number of days before the end of the term. And so typically when any kind of legislation gets passed that has a funding impact, especially something at this magnitude, there's got to be some level of consideration too. If it's passed beyond that March date, we can't do anything for next year. A big chunk of our staff, if not already released, we couldn't make that level of reduction. So I don't know there's a definitive answer, but if it weren't considered until spring, I'm going to guess it would have to be pushed out to some level, or at least that requirement would have to be reconsidered. Okay, so we have one more thing that I'm going to ask you to do, and we're right up at just a little bit before 8 o'clock. In your blue packet, there is a sheet that has 5 questions that we've outlined for you. They're questions that kind of range from how did you actually first hear about Senate Bill 16 or any of the forums that we have, to what do you think the level of awareness is in our community, to some of the ideas that you might have about how we can go about raising our level of awareness. And so we do want to give you a couple of minutes within your table groups to talk about a couple of these questions. We would encourage you, I think there's a green sheet on each of the tables, and what we would encourage you to do as a group, you don't have to answer all 5 of the questions, but we sure would love it if you give us some feedback, especially on some of the ideas you might have about how we can raise awareness and how we can continue to engage our community. We're going to spend probably about 15 minutes, maybe a little bit less, in terms of the discussion. We are going to collect those feedback sheets, so I'm going to encourage you again as you talk about to share the feedback. Before we break, though, when we come back together, we will give tables an opportunity. If there's a highlight you want to share from the discussion that you'd like to share with the whole group, we certainly will do that. And then the last thing, again, I want to mention is that as your groups are talking, if you got a question you need answered, just put your hand up and we'll make sure that somebody gets to your table. Hopefully they can answer that question for you. So if you would be so kind as to give us about 15 minutes more of your time to give us some of that feedback, we really would appreciate it.
So who's got the best handwriting? Not one.
Have to report out from your table, but if there's a highlight that you want to share from your discussion, I would love to hear it. And then just in closing, I'm going to give Representative Ives and Senator Connolly's just joined us as well for our discussion tonight. So I'm going to give them a chance to make a couple of comments to close out as well. But let me first capture some of the table's discussions. Does anybody at the table want to share a highlight or a thought from their discussion? Love to hear it. Somebody's got to go first.
Well, I think our main discussion point was that we felt that more information needs to get out there, that people really understood what this was about, what the potential ramifications were, that I think you have more people interested. It doesn't seem like our small discussion here that a lot of people are aware of really what's going on.
But I think, that we need to take ownership of that ourselves too. The school district can only do so much, so we as a group, hundreds of people, right, each of us. So I'm putting this on my Facebook tonight, so.
Thank you.
Unfortunately, in this condition, that many people, we don't have computers. Sorry, but not everybody have a computer. So most of the people, when I talk, they say, I don't have a computer, how we can have that information? So I suggest to send it to the school and make a copy, which Erica, it was a good idea, and I'm gonna do that. Because I wanna know everybody, understand what's going on, and I don't wanna hear in the future, oh, I'm sorry, if we do, no, too late. Now open your mouth because they got a community reunions. We have a newspaper, we had papers from the school. If you don't want it, or you close your eyes to the information, it's nothing you can say later on.
Yeah.
Because I don't have a computer, but if you're interested for my kids, I'm interested in whatever is going on in the school. So
The schools could make computers available to those families. The easy answer is wherever your kids are going to school, say it's Hubble School, they could have computers available to you from there and do that same thing.
yeah, but the deal is, maybe you study computer, maybe I don't, I didn't, and
Somebody could assist you. I'm sure we got.
Yes.
And that's the excuse that they give for not actually doing it. Yeah, that's the
it's
excuse.
not excuse. It's not excuse because we are over here like community and different levels they work. So maybe you work in an office, you got more space to they can know everything. But if you work in a factory, sorry, not everybody is at a high level education. So that's why I emphasize to send it to the school and the school make it manage to them, to the parents.
I think here on that, we need to make sure we make the information available in a number of different ways.
Thank you, sir.
I mean, I'm sure we could work with the libraries
Absolutely.
in that way too.
Chris?
Dr. Schiller, is there a way we can do it to the postal customer versus, there's a lot of people that are not in the school district, and I'm thinking of some of our senior populations and that's out there that don't have access or, how to really get access to our school district. And I know that's a cost to snail mail stuff, but I think there's a large population in our community that's how they get their information, is still through the mail. And I haven't seen anything really come through on that level mail-wise, so maybe that's a route to hit the people that aren't getting it, that don't have kids in school that would be seeing it.
We do send communications out several times a year because you're right, it is a cost. So we budget accordingly, kind of to have 3 to 4 times a year where we send a written communication to our families. So that will be coming out in December to all homes, our quarterly newsletter, and we'll certainly have some information about SB16 in there as well. So absolutely. But we just kind of have to include it into something else for budget purposes. But thank you.
I mean, I can't speak for Wheaton, but Warrenville has a little hometown paper that covers Warrenville, West Chicago, and Winfield. And I have a lot of senior neighbors, and they read the Herald and they read that. I mean, that is their life source. And one of them has even said, I'd love to come into the school and see what's going on. I'm just, because her kids, she's got grandkids.
And I would love any help and encouraging them to cover this issue. Every email and communication that our parents get, our local media also gets to, including that paper. So any encouragement that the residents can offer to that paper to cover this, I would be happy to set up any interviews or, thank you.
No, I just asked you what share you no, so they don't have to.
I think for us, that it was, we were more concerned about what it's going to be, how is it going to affect in the future. And, even though some things are mandated, part of it really is the money. I mean, as we're looking over how it's going to affect our community, numbers are kind of lining up. And the fact that even though we have the numbers in front of us, those are just, estimates. We really don't know what's going to happen. Maybe that changes. And I think the community needs to realize that even if the children don't go to school or that it affects the community as a whole. And so I think, like, for our neighbors, I think, oh, it's school, but if they
Yes, absolutely. So a little bit more on the impact.
So at this table, one thing that I haven't heard so far is they talked about wanting to have sort of a update, regular updates on what the perceived progress is of the bill and what we are doing, steps that we're taking in between, and maybe an accurate assessment of the changing assessment of probability as it's going along, but sort of, timely updates, rather than just waiting until it happens.
Mr. Mives and
Conley, let me give them a chance to offer a couple of comments in close.
If you're interested at all, at 3 p.m. on Tuesday when they do have this hearing, it should be televised. It's in the larger room. It should be televised. You should be able to watch the whole proceeding. If you go to the ILGA website, they should have a link to the video stream for it. I just wanted to, I was talking with the table, and the question was, who's really pushing for this? And I thought, well, you guys perhaps don't understand the history of why SB16 even came to fruition. And the truth is that the Senate Republican staff, and this is Mike Conley, your state senator, Republican, his staff, we knew that there were games being played with the educational formula, the general state aid formula specifically. And so they did a very, very extensive study about where the dollars are going. So for example, Chicago has 18% of the student population, but they get something like 37% of the special ed dollars. They have 18% of the population, but they get 47% of the CPPRT dollars that come in. They have 18% of the population, but they get something like, how much is it, 28%, or I don't even remember all the deficits. They get, anyway, in all these categories, they essentially are getting more than their fair share, by and large. And really, it amounted to about $800 million more that they're getting that they shouldn't get if they were treated like every other school district around the state. So we've been arguing for a school funding formula change. Everybody has. And so they made a resolution, they set up a task force committee, and it was supposed to be both caucuses, both House and Senate. So Democrat senators, Republican senators, Democrat representatives, Republican representatives. Well, Mike Madigan refused to appoint people from the House of Representatives. So no Democrats, no House Representatives. They came up with another resolution, and the senator said, well, we'll just do our own little task force. Out of that task force that met no more than 4 times before SB16 popped up. The task force wasn't even finished, and SB16 popped up and was there. So there was a lot of other interest groups coming up with this funding formula that is getting pushed now. And so no representative at all was even allowed into those initial hearings. It then passed through the Senate,
and it did not come to the House for a vote in the spring, mainly because it's an election year and it's an egregious bill, and there would have been a number of Democratic reps who would have completely lost had they voted for something like this. So it did not come up for a vote. Then we found out about July of this summer that Speaker Madigan was meeting with legislative leaders about this bill, his leaders. And so that's when we knew, watch out, this bill is still alive and it's still going to come forward in some form. But really the genesis of the bill is that they wanted to redistribute our tax dollars for two reasons. One, they felt like there was not enough funding for the rural districts. And I've asked for some additional data on that because the truth is that on average, all of our students, the state average is about 11,000 something per student that gets for education. And the recommended number from an advisory committee is about $8,600. The general state aid, or the number that we use for education committee is $6,100. Regardless, the way to fund education is not to take from us to give to the rural districts. That's not the answer. The other bad thing about this bill is that it's only based on inputs. So it looks at three things essentially. How much local wealth do you have that you can afford to pay for your students yourself with no state aid? And how much poverty do you have? And how many are English language learners? It doesn't look at the output or the efficiency of your school and how well your school board runs that school. It's all based on inputs. And when you looked at available local resources, the worst thing about this bill, well, there's a lot of bad things, I don't know if this is the worst, but it's very, very problematic, is that it allows Chicago to take credit for their pension payment against available local resources. So your tax dollars truly are redistributed and going to Chicago to shore up their teacher pensions. That's what's happening in this bill. Because no other person, no other district gets to take their available local resources and subtract out the pension payment. Only Chicago, and that's $200 million there. Plus, just so you know the shenanigans that go on, they also get about $145 million in block granted money that nobody else gets. They get it in block grants that nobody else gets. And in the last budget cycle, they got nearly $100 million extra through other budget bills that nobody else got. They got $35 million for a school in Speaker Madigan's home district. They got $50 million to shore up their teacher fund. And they got $10 million in safe passage money for their dangerous streets. Nobody else got that transportation money. Nobody got a school $35 million grant thrown on top of a IDOT bill that didn't go through the normal grant process. So there's a lot of problems. And we need to take a stand here and tell them we are tired of being the ATM for the state and we're not going to take it. That's how I see it. That's what I see. So, there you go.
First of all, I know it's getting late, so I'll speak very quickly. I'm State Senator Connolly. I'm from the Naperville area. My kids went to Naperville 203. We had a 203 town hall like this last night, and someone asked me, well, Mike, what is the solution then? What's the solution there? Well, Jeannie brought up, and I think it's really, it crystallizes the crux of the problem. The formula says if you have 18% of the special needs kids, you get 18% of the money. But Chicago doesn't. They get 30% of the money. So basically, special needs kids in 200, 203, 204 aren't worth as much, according to the state of Illinois, than a kid in Chicago. So if they live up to the formula, that's $800 million. That's real money. TIF districts. I'm in Naperville 203, and I know 200 and 203 have this long-standing TIF issue in Cantera. But a TIF district allows for a municipality to essentially use what would be education dollars to give to developers. Chicago has more TIFs than any town in the state. Anybody work in the Loop? The Loop, where the Chicago Mercantile Exchange is a TIF district. Chicago takes $500 million a year from their schools to give to developers in TIF districts. That's not included in the available local resources in this bill. So it kind of boggles the mind when you think they already take $700 to $800 million more. Jeannie left out one little thing. What really started this was a year and a half ago, Speaker Madigan said, hey, you suburbanites, you get a free lunch. We pay for our pensions. You got to pay for yours too. Remember the pension cost shift. So that's when we said, okay, let's get our staff to look at the education budget and see where the money's really going. So our staff came back and they're like, Senator, you're not going to believe this. I said, yes, I will believe it. What's the number? He says it's $700 to $800 million that Chicago gets that they shouldn't get. So we kind of caught them. And you catch someone speeding, it's like, hey, look, you're wrong here. So what did they do? Instead of saying, no, you're right. And by the way, we don't know how many years they took that type of funding from the rest of the state of Illinois. So instead of saying, you're right, let's get back to the formula, let's equalize, they said, no, we have the votes and we will codify this and you're going to learn to accept it. So where do we stand today? In the Senate, and I have to give you this anecdote, and those who've heard it at Monroe and other forums, I went to the Senate Democratic sponsor, Andy Menard, from Bunker Hill, Illinois, and said, Andy, my district loses $30 million. Where are we going to make that money up? And he goes, Mike, you're a property-rich district. Just raise your property taxes. Just raise your property taxes. I said, well, first of all, we're tax capped. So you can't raise your taxes that high. Because, well, that's, you guys will figure it out. That's their answer. You guys will figure it out. And you're all rich in DuPage County, which is shocking to me. In Naperville 203, in 2000, they had 1% poverty. Today, 16.5% of their children are poverty. But according to this bill and according to the way they've treated funding, those kids aren't worth as much as a kid in the city of Chicago. So where do we go from here? The bill's in committee. Go to ilga.gov. I know, on Tuesday, because I have about 400 questions for Representative Ives, who is my state representative, who I can assure you will let Speaker Madigan know how she and I and all of us feel about this bill. You mentioned Facebook. The way to fight this bill is there are state reps on the Democratic side in Schaumburg, Park Ridge, Glenview, Orland Park, all through the suburbs, who right now have a real stark choice. Tell Speaker Madigan no, which they seem to have a problem doing, or stand up for their own taxpayers. But I've got relatives in the North Shore, and they're ginning up the people up there. There are people I know that I went to college with who live in Schaumburg. They're active in their Chamber of Commerce. They're working on this. We know where Jeannie stands. We need to get others too. And social media gives us an ability we didn't have before. So I would encourage that greatly. And I make no predictions about that place. I've been in Springfield 4 years. And let me tell you, the lame duck session's coming. A new governor's coming. Those 6 House Democrats are pretty, they've all, 2 of them called me, can I meet this guy? Yeah, you want to meet him, because he's about to become the boss. And, but I think we have to be vigilant. The last time we went through a lame duck, it wasn't a new governor, but it was the current governor, you had a tax increase at 11:30 at night in the House, and in the Senate at 2 in the morning. And then the swearing in was at noon. So be very careful. I know 200 is doing a great job trying to send out emails, forward them to your friends, forward them to your neighbors, your church groups, your Rotary groups, your bunco clubs, whatever you can do to get the message out. Because frankly, it's a battle won. I mean, it's a battle won. I've spoken to 40 or 50 groups throughout this district on this issue, and I thank you guys for being here on a Thursday night. It's freezing cold. Thank 200 for doing this, and I'll stick around for any questions if you have any. Barbara?
Senator and Representative, thank you for being here. We appreciate it, and we appreciate your advocacy efforts on our behalf. I have a very naive question because I like to solve problems, and we had a little discussion last night about being a problem-solving board. Is there any way, is there any activity going on within your ranks to take this bill and massage it in such a way that it really addresses some problems that are legitimate? I think there probably are some legitimate funding problems. I mean, the state superintendent said that. There are districts in our state that cannot afford to send their kids to a decent school. So is there any conversation going around other than don't vote for SB16, but centering around let's get together and work on this so that it takes all of these other issues into account, including TIF districts in Chicago, including little districts that have 350 students that spend $15,000 per student, including those issues. Is anybody talking about that?
Well, I'll be honest with you, we've had one presentation on SB16 in our Education and Programs Committee, and that was when Andy Menard first presented it to us, I think, in February. And then it was really sitting in the Senate for a long time, so we didn't touch it in the House. And then in May, it all kind of blew up when the numbers were all done by ISB. We saw how much our districts were going to lose. And then basically it was just budget, and then a session break. And over the summer, it's campaign season. So truthfully, it kind of got, nothing was really being worked on until we found out about the secret meetings. Now, I think we made a really good impression on the state superintendent when he came down, because afterwards in speaking, he goes, you guys raised a lot of good questions that we never thought about, like cost of living. Naperville versus Edwardsville, huge difference. It's never taken into account in this bill. And he was also thought that whether or not a district actually went out to the max tax cap for available resources, he said that's definitely, we need to look at that. So I think we've made real progress with him, because there are ways that we can come together on a better bill. And so I'm encouraged by that. I think we're going to get a better solution. I think part of the problem, though, is we do need some mandate relief here. That was an amendment on the Senate side that they refused to put into the bill. Mandate relief may not help completely, but it may help some. At least makes you feel better. So we're open to solutions on this, but the first thing is I'm not paying for Chicago pensions, and they're going to be complying with the same formula. That's my whole big thing. And then let's see where we sit once we do all that. So I think that we have ways to go before we're there.
We have discussions amongst us on rank and file all the time on all sorts of issues. I've spoken to 2 House members on a different issue, and I brought this up, and they were of the opinion, we have to do this in the spring. We have to do this with a Republican governor, with Democrat and Republican caucuses. That was what we thought was happening when we put together the Senate bipartisan committee. And I wish my colleague Senator McConaughey from Kane County were here, because she'll tell you they met 4 times. And there was no report, and the next thing you know, the bill's out, it's in committee, and we didn't have input. We want to address this, but in addressing that, we have to address a number of things. Chicago's last property tax referendum for education, 1983. 1983. A home in Chicago, equalized assessed valuation $250,000. Pay $2,400 a year, the home on the southwest side of Chicago, versus in Geneva, it's $4,600, or in the suburbs, you might say. Chicago doesn't tax their property at the rate that we do, and they should. So these are all the discussions. Cost of living, TIF relief, or mandate relief. We want to have that, and a lot of both sides of the aisle, rank and file, want to have that discussion. But there's one guy in Springfield who does dictate terms of what's going on, at least until January 14th at noon. So that means I'm giving you the brutal honest truth. Question?
Sorry, first, I'm not going too much on the political things, because I think like they open one hall for Jefferson child, early child school, and they said, oh, we gotta build this and that, and you gotta put a $1, and then for the rest of your, whatever you live in your house, they're gonna be for that. Okay, they open that hole. Now they open this hole. So if I'm afraid if they open this hole, that and the way to open it, next, what is that? So we gotta close those holes, and then next one, and I wanted a political thing, a political person that believe in a staying by itself, and they say, I believe in this, and I'm going to do this. I don't want the people go in the Springfield and say, oh yeah, the persons or the people say that, but I can't. I gotta do this. So I want to believe in you. I want to believe in you guys, and they're gonna push forward. This is not gonna happen. And also, I want to know if we can fight to put a law, in case this come to a law, if we can fight on a Supreme Court.
I am a lawyer, but I'm not going to give you legal advice right now. But there are plenty of great lawyers in the Wheaton and Naperville area. We share the frustration. Our 3 kids, we moved down here for the schools. My wife and I, 26 years ago, when we got married. And we're empty nesters. And we get that tax bill from Glen Henry, and we go, oh gosh, here we go. But we know that there's another generation of young families moving in. And also, I know that my property value kind of depends on the success of the public schools in my district. So it's a very important thing. But like I think Jeannie said it yesterday, we pay our property taxes. My check goes to Hillside Avenue in Naperville, and I know it goes into the Naperville district. I don't have a problem with that. We get a little bit of funding from the state. And now they're coming and grabbing that too. That's money we send down to Springfield every year. We don't ask for a lot. We get a little bit. And they're taking that too. And that's what, and it's all the suburbs. It's not just Wheaton and Naperville. I mean, it is from Glenview all the way around through Kane County and DuPage and Will into Tinley Park, Orland Park. So it is, and again, we want to have that committee. And I want to have people from the School Management Alliance, from the teachers. I want everyone on that committee so that we have that honest discussion. What are other states doing? This doesn't seem to be working. I'm not sure some people in charge want that discussion, to be brutally frank, but we do, and we're going to continue to push for it.
We are a little bit beyond the time that we promised that we're going to keep you. So I do want to remind you that Senator Conley and Representative Ives, if you have a question that you want to ask of them, I would give you an opportunity to come over there and do it. But I want to thank everybody for coming out tonight. I really, really do appreciate your time and your advocacy on behalf of the district, and make sure we get those green sheets if we did to draw your way out.